You sit before me carrying a question that is not only about others, but about yourself. Why do empaths vanish without warning, and why do they never return? To understand this mystery, we must enter not the surface world of behavior, but the subterranean kingdom of the psyche, where archetypes whisper, shadows breathe, and the soul arranges its own escapes. What you call an empath is not merely a personality type or a sentimental trait. It is an ancient wound transformed into a vessel of sensitivity. The empath is born not through ease, but through fracture. Somewhere in the labyrinth of early life, the empath learned that survival depended on perceiving what was unspoken, feeling what was hidden, anticipating what was denied. This is not a gift granted by heaven alone. It is the scar that becomes luminous, the trauma that learns to listen. The empath walks into relationships carrying this heightened organ of perception. It is invisible, but it is always open, always absorbing. They do not only hear words. They feel the tremor beneath them, the hesitation in the voice, the contradiction between gesture and mask. When they give with a whole nervous system, not merely with thought. And when they stay too long in the presence of deception, exploitation, or indifference, they are consumed from within. They do not cry out immediately, for their archetype is the healer, the wounded physician who believes that with enough patience and love, they can repair the broken temple of another soul. But the psyche has its limits. It is in dreams that the empath's threshold first appears. They dream of drowning in houses where the ceilings leak, of carrying infants that never stop crying, of wandering through cities where every stranger demands a piece of their clothing. These are not random fictions of sleep. They are the images of depletion, the unconscious screaming what the waking ego refuses to hear. At a certain point, the unconscious acts, and when it acts, it is swift, decisive, without explanation. One day the empath is still present, listening, offering, enduring. The next day, a sudden silence falls. They leave without a word because words would only be captured, twisted, or ignored. The departure is not a choice but an eruption. This is why you cannot persuade them back. Once an empath psyche is torn away from a situation, it is not the conscious ego that made the decision. It is the deeper self, the archetypal center of the psyche that orchestrates individuation. The self whispers, "Enough." And when the self speaks, the conscious mind must follow, even if it does not understand. Return is impossible, because return would mean re-entering the same tomb that already drained their lifeblood. The archetype of resurrection does not take you back into the same grave. It leads you into a new life. Consider the myth of Persephone. She is abducted into the underworld, forced to consume its fruit, bound to its shadows. But once she emerges into the upper world, she never returns in the same form. She becomes the goddess of the cycle itself, the one who teaches that some descents must happen, but also that no return is truly a return. It is a transformation. So too with the empath. They may appear to leave suddenly, but in truth, their soul has been descending for a long time. The departure is only the visible sign of an inner metamorphosis already complete. What makes this departure so devastating to those who are left behind is the silence. Silence is the language of the self when the ego refuses dialogue. The empath knows that if they try to explain, their words will be met with gaslighting, denial, or manipulation. They have already lived inside the endless cycle of justification and apology. Their leaving without a word is not cruelty. It is an act of psychic survival. Imagine a bird trying to describe to the cage why it must fly. The cage does not understand flight. It only understands containment. It is as if an invisible thread that bound them to the other has been severed by forces greater than willpower. I have often said that the psyche is not governed by the conscious ego, but by deeper structures, by what I call the collective unconscious. Within this unconscious, the empath is bound to archetypes of sacrifice and redemption. They are the ones who unconsciously enact the myth of the healer, the saint, or even the scapegoat, and yet every archetype contains its shadow. When the healer is not balanced, they become the martyr, endlessly bleeding, unable to live for themselves. This is why the leaving is sudden. The martyr does not gradually fade out. They are rescued by the unconscious through a radical act. It is the archetype reasserting balance, preventing psychic death. One day the empath is held in chains by invisible loyalties, and the next the chains have melted like wax under fire. To the outside world it looks cold, cruel, even ruthless. But inside the empath, it is nothing less than salvation. They are pulled away not by choice, but by destiny. You may notice that such people often vanish into solitude. They do not immediately leap into another relationship or entangle themselves in new obligations. They disappear into silence, into the hermit archetype. This solitude is necessary because it is the only place where they can hear their own voice again. For years they have been attuned to others, like a harp resonating with every passing touch. Now the strings must be retuned to the self. Solitude is not abandonment of humanity. It is the re-establishment of psychic boundaries. It is the alchemy of the soul in retreat. In their dreams during this phase, empaths encounter forests, caves, oceans, vast landscapes that stretch beyond the limits of the city. These are images of the unconscious itself. The soul, having been drained by the demands of others, finds nourishment in the wilderness of its own depth. The forest provides images of rootedness. The cave offers the womb of renewal. The ocean dissolves the false identity that was built from pleasing others. The psyche provides exactly the medicine that the conscious ego could not imagine. Why do they never return? Because the archetypal current that carries them forward does not flow backwards. Individuation is not a circle that loops back into the same cage. It is a spiral that carries the soul higher, even if it seems to revisit old themes. When an empath departs, the person they once were is already gone. Even if they stand in front of the same people, they are no longer available in the same way. Their departure is an initiation. Once initiated, the initiate cannot go back to innocence. You may wonder, is there not forgiveness? Is there not reconciliation? Yes, forgiveness is possible, but forgiveness does not mean re-entry. The empath may forgive with a whole heart, but the archetype of martyrdom has been burned away. They no longer carry the same compulsion to heal, to save, to endure. Forgiveness is inner release, not external repetition. Do not confuse the two. When the empath forgives, it is not an invitation back into the old pattern. It is a blessing from afar, a closing of karmic cycles. Think of the phoenix. It burns in flames and rises anew. The ashes do not reassemble into the old bird, they are simply gone. The phoenix that emerges carries continuity, but also transformation. The empath who has left and never returned is like this. They may appear to you again, but they are not who you knew. They are another version, born from fire, no longer bound to the past. To demand that they return to what was is to demand the impossible, to ask ashes to rise again in their old form. And yet we must look deeper. The empath does not leave only because of external exploitation. They leave because the soul demands individuation. It is holy because it awakens. It forces both the empath and the one left behind to encounter themselves without distraction. In the silence, you will find your own voice, or else you will drown in your own noise. The empath's absence is like the desert into which prophets are driven. In that desert, something new is born. Let us speak now of destiny. The empath who has left is not merely wandering aimlessly. Their departure is the beginning of a new archetypal journey. They may become healers who no longer bleed, creators who channel their sensitivity into art, teachers who carry compassion without self-destruction. They may embody the archetype of the wise one, who gives not out of compulsion but out of abundance. Their empathy is no longer a wound exploited by others. It becomes a gift tempered by fire. This transformation is irreversible. Once they have seen the pattern, once they have recognized the cost of staying, they cannot unknow it. Their destiny calls them forward. If you have ever wondered why they never return, it is because they are already somewhere else, not only in geography or in relationship, but in soul. They have entered a new level of consciousness. To step back would be to fracture themselves, to live in contradiction. Individuation does not permit this. The self demands integrity. Thus, their non-return is not rejection. It is fidelity to the soul. Consider the archetype of death and rebirth. The empath's departure is a symbolic death. They die to the identity of the endless giver, the sacrificial lamb, the one who stayed until empty. In that death they are reborn into wholeness, and as in physical death, one cannot return to the body once it has been shed. So in psychic death, one cannot return to the old life once it has been transcended. This is why reconciliation can only happen at a different level, never within the same form. The silence left behind by their departure is also an invitation for those abandoned. It is an invitation to face themselves, to no longer rely on the empath as an external source of balance. It is an initiation into self-sufficiency, into confronting the shadow, into finding one's own whole. And for the empath, the silence is an invitation to listen inwardly, to finally hear the music of the self that was drowned out by the cries of others. Silence is not the end. It is the beginning of dialogue with the unconscious. Many resist this. They cling to the fantasy that the empath will return one day, that the silence will end, that the old pattern can be restored. But this is only nostalgia for a prison. To grow is to release, to allow the absence to teach, to accept that departure is transformation.